Yes.
All right. Then we'll call to order the meeting of the Greenwood Common Council on Monday, April the 6th, 7:05. And this evening, the circumstances, we're going to forego the pledge, but if you would join me in a prayer at this moment for our council meeting tonight. Dear God, we do thank you for the opportunity as elected officials to serve our fellow citizens, Lord, here in Greenwood, and we pray tonight for your guidance and your wisdom as we make decisions for our city. We also pray for our first responders as they put their lives on the line for our safety. Lord, they keep them safe and from violence and, Lord, from infectious diseases. Lord, watch over the healthcare workers as they battle on the front line. We just pray, Lord, that you would keep them safe, honor their courage as they put their own health and the health of their families in danger. Lord, keep them safe, give them strength, Lord, and give them a peace of mind. And God, please protect those who, because of their work, have to come in contact with the general public on a regular basis. May they stay healthy, Lord, and give them a peace of mind as well. God, we just thank you for your mercy. Pray you would watch over us tonight. In Christ's name, amen. All right, roll call.
Bates. Campbell.
Here.
Dine.
Here.
Gibson.
Here.
Hill.
Here.
Hopper.
Here.
Lexi.
Present.
Pendleton.
Here.
Williams.
Here.
We have a quorum of 8. All of you should have received.
Bates.
All of you should have received copies of the minutes from our regular meeting of March the 16th. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second. Was that who made the motion?
Lexi and Don.
Lexi, and then Dine, you made the second.
Am I not on?
All right. Any additions,
Amber's for a minute.
deletions, or corrections?
Come on, Zoe.
I hear a lot of talking. Any additions, deletions, or corrections to our minutes? See none, then roll call on the minutes.
Campbell.
Aye.
Dine.
Aye.
Gibson.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Hopper.
Aye.
Lexi.
Abstain.
Pendleton.
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
Minutes are approved on a vote of 7-0 with 1 abstention. Reports, Corporation Council.
You all should have received the semi-monthly IDEM report and the litigation report on SharePoint. And should you have questions, please contact me. I'll be glad to discuss those with you.
All right. Any questions at this time? Anything from the controller's office?
There's nothing this evening.
All right. Any other committee or board reports? All right. Seeing none. Audience requests, their audience input at this time is going to be drastically different. We can't really do it the way we normally do, but my understanding is audience can use a chat feature. And so if they have something they would like to say, they can type it out, and that will go out to all of us. So all of you will be able to see that. At this point, there'll be no need for us to read those since we can all read those ourselves. But that way the audience can participate. It just won't be like we normally do it. One note as well, as we get into this, ordinance number 2008, the very first one on our agenda. The petitioners have withdrawn that. They have withdrawn the request for rezoning, so we will not be dealing with that tonight. Ordinances and resolutions. Notice of intent to consider. Ordinance 2012.
An ordinance to establish an equitable impact fee for the purpose of planning and financing park and recreational infrastructure to serve new development in the city of Greenwood, sponsored by Dine.
Do I have a motion?
So move.
Motion by, was that Mr. Bates?
That's him.
Motion by Mr. Bates. Second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Gibson. So let the record show that Mr. Bates is here tonight. All right, Mr. Taggart, do you have something you want to say about this?
Yep. Good evening. Every 5 years, we're tasked with the renewal that you guys see before you of the recreational impact fee study. Our current study is set to expire mid-October. A state statute requires a new study be approved every 6 months prior to the expiration of the existing study. This 6-month period is set in place to allow the market to adjust. An approval tonight will ensure the impact fee collection will not lapse. Lehman and Lehman have prepared the study. Mr. Chuck Lehman, who I believe is on the line, he will provide a brief summary of the study and answer any questions. Chuck?
Very good. Good evening in this unique setting. Thank you. I think you have a hard copy of the presentation. If I could maybe share that with the group, and I could just go through it in somewhat quicker fashion. Knowing that this made we did a very in-depth study, our presentation at the Plan Commission a couple of weeks ago. I can go to that same level, or I could just hit the highlights. It's up to you at this point in time. Well, let me go ahead and get started.
I think the highlights would be fine.
Okay, and I may zip through these slides just to give you some basis for what they are, and we'll get to the detail. You'll see on this opening slide we have the presentations that we've given so far. We've met with the Park Board. We gave them this presentation. They gave a recommendation. We went to the Plan Commission. The Plan Commission a couple of weeks ago voted on a favorable recommendation to the Council. At the Plan Commission is where the formal public hearing is held, and then we're here tonight with the Council. The impact fee ordinance, or the impact fee statute for the state, requires that an impact fee advisory committee be established. Certain percentage of that needs to have representation from the real estate, the building development communities, and you'll see those people who served in that capacity on this slide. I'd like to publicly thank them for their due diligence on that process. The formula for the impact fee is shown on slide number 3. By the way, you'll see numbers may be out of sequence. I cut out several slides on this, so the number sequence are not going to be in sync. The recreation impact fee takes a look at what that 10-year projected costs are going to be, minus any non-local revenues, which would be basically donations. And then taken off of that any impact deductions, which we'll go into a little bit of detail on. And you take that number and divide it by the 10-year forecast of residential building permits over that 10-year period. The slide that you'll see here on slide 4 looks at the community level of service standards and how the current standard looks at your current population. It compares that with your current infrastructure for recreation, and it's measured against recreation standards, which is the teeter-totter, and the recreation standards are the balancing on that. In this element, you'll see that there's a wedge of orange that represents current deficiencies. That would have to be funded outside of impact fees. So that's the current snapshot of today. In the future, in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that same forecast, but again, you're going to have more population, you'll have more residential development, even if you have additional infrastructure. In this case, you measure that against the same recreation standards, but that wedge of orange, or excuse me, red of green would represent impact fee future needs, and that would be 100% funded by impact fees. What we did in this forecast is we worked with the planning department and we forecasted out development potential in and around the city. This is a map that kind of illustrates that. Some of this area looks at developments in the city limits itself, and those outside the city limits that would be part of that future growth. We went through several pages of database that looked at each of those land parcels. We compared that with the developable area within those parcels and took that times the current zoning for residential development and did a build-out capacity for each of those parcels. Those parcels were then weighted against what could be seen as potential growth in the next 10 years, and those were represented by a percentage. We then, at the very bottom, let me go to the next slide because this summarizes it. We looked at both three different scenarios of development. One was a conservation or conservative scenario, one being a very aggressive scenario. We ended up going with the median scenario, which is the center portion of that. We also looked at existing developments that still had build out capacity within that and factored those into it. You'll see that we have a growth projection in the next 10 years of a little over 7,500 residential building permits, and using the 2020 or 2010 census, we'd be looking at about 20,000 new residents that would be part of that growth. The next slide looks at how that population would forecast out over the next 10 years and what the historical population growth would be. You'll see that we start off with it being somewhat a typical average through that, and then that grows to a higher percentage or higher growth in those last 10 years, in those last portions of those 10 years. So that developed our portion for the population growth. We then looked at the park infrastructure. This looks at land acreage. In the overall Greenwood Park system, you have close to 400 acres of park land. We looked at over 40 different recreational infrastructure components. And again, this slide is small, but you'll see we documented each of those components within the existing park system, which are the shaded portions in tan. The blue portions would represent school facilities, and then the ones to the very far right-hand side would represent those of schools. We looked at each individual parcel or each individual infrastructure component. This looks at land itself, and this is somewhat the simplest one to understand, but you'll see that we've got, looking at the bottom portion of this slide, we have the 393.79 acres of parkland. If we use a community level service standard of 9 acres per 1,000 people, we would have a current deficiency of 151 acres in park acres. Looking at that future growth of that additional almost 20,000 people, there would be a future need in addition of 151 acres of 161 or 168.2 acres. Same type of methodology was used.
Has left the meeting.
That the same type of information was analyzed in all of those 40-some units. Looking through that, one of the aspects that we looked with the committee and with the park department was identifying the A priorities, and you'll see those highlighted in either green or some shade of different color. We looked at those individual items, again, compared that to the A priorities. We looked at in the scenario analysis, we look at what are the actual costs for each of those recreational components, what that impact fee amount would be. And then this is more of the summary on slide 21. At the bottom, you'll see that there was 14 components that were identified as being A priorities. You'll see in the third column what the current deficiencies are and what those future needs would be in that fourth column, and that what the raw number of the impact fee would be $1,637. Some of the applied changes to this is that we applied that median population model. We looked at the land acreage being 9 acres per 1,000. We increased the cost of that land from $30,000 per acre to $35,000 per acre, and that the trail desired level of service was reduced down to 1 mile for every 1,750 residents. This part of the state statute says that you have to also identify where current deficiencies are going to be funded. Slide 22 looks at how those deficiencies would be funded for each of those 14 items. You'll see that we worked with the city on reviewing this and coming up with this strategy. Looking at the various components, you'll see 3 of them are headed with a tanned area. Those are areas that actually would be funded out of property taxes within the residents. And I'll get to how that's important as we go to the next slide. The the next slide looks at that because the state statute requires that new people coming in are actually exempt from using or having to pay for current deficiencies. So the way that those would be funded would be through property taxes. So we basically have to discount that up front. I won't get into the details of these sheets, but there you'll see at the bottom lower right-hand corner, there was about $360,000 that was actually concluded to be an impact deduction that would have to be applied. So when you look and apply into this, you recall that we had $12 million of impact cost. We apply that impact deduction of that $360,000, reduces that adjusted impact needs cost to be $11.9 million. You take that $11.9 million divided by the 7,500 new resident building permits over the next 10 years, and that computes out to be a $1,590 impact fee. That impact fee, as per your past ordinances, in your impact fee updates and so on, actually has an optional housing equivalent, and that housing equivalent breakdown is noted in the lower portion of this slide. For example, the single-family resident would pay that full amount. A two-family dwelling, each unit would pay 95% of that, or $1,510, and so on down the list. The average increase that the city has had in the impact fees has been around a 3% increase per year. So back in 2015, the impact fee was computed to be $1,206. Currently, in 2019, you're at $1,357. So the proposed impact fee for the 2020 era would be that's $1,590. We've basically showed here this slide showing what that impact collections would be, either on a stagnant by increasing that impact fee on an annual basis, and what that impact would be by increasing it 3%. One of the advantages of being in Johnson County and being in Greenwood is that you fall underneath the Indianapolis MPO. They actually track the cost of what goods and services are over a period of time. Chart in the table at the bottom kind of illustrates what that last 15-year average has been for the cost of construction. And it's been averaging just a little bit under 4% per year. So this is just, I mean, some communities have actually taken this gross domestic product index and actually applied that to their ordinance itself. Basically, the recommendations on this slide illustrates that we have one impact zone. We identify the A priorities within the impact fee study. Current deficiencies are 13.2 million. The future needs with the impact deductions is 11.9 million. The recommended impact fee dollar amount would be $1,590. That there would be consideration to continue the housing equivalent, and there would be some type of annual inflation rate that would be factored into the impact fee on an annual basis. It was also reported that the future use of the impact fee collections and the uses of those fees would be reported on an annual basis by the Park Department. The Builders Association of Greater Indianapolis has a checklist of items of 10 components. These are items that we measure our study against, and is making sure that we fulfilled all those. And we have filled that out when we completed the study. So that's our overall recommendation in a very quick and fashion. So are there any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Lehman? So Mr. Hopper, you must be outside. I can hear the birds.
I am. Yep.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Lehman?
Mr. President, I just have a couple.
Okay.
First of all, this is a lot of information to digest in one setting. I guess there's a concept different here. Impact fees in the past have always been for future development. Does this impact fee, does it impact present residences of the city?
No, the premise is that this is, it is for their future growth. It does impact the current residents on how how the current deficiencies are going to be funded. And again, I can go back to that slide, but that's been the same that we have had in all the past ordinances as well. There's no change other than that.
And so there would be, I guess, as a property owner and a taxpayer, there would be some impact, or there would be some difference with this ordinance and its passage. Is that accurate to say or not?
Yes, it's accurate to say, but and again, I'll just verify that last time there was impact on the current population as well, based on how the current deficiencies were going to be funded. On slide 22 here, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, if I understand it right, that the $1,590 impact fee is on new houses, and the amount of money that we collect from that, the deficiencies over what we need, would be made up through normal tax income, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And so you'll see on slide like 20. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So technically, that this $1,590 is going to still leave us short, and that deficiency would have to be made up, and that's how it will affect the current homeowners, right? Yes. I mean, they won't be charged a fee necessarily. It'll just come out of their possibility of increased taxes. Right. So in theory, the higher we make the impact fee, the less it's going to affect the current homeowners. Is that correct?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay. All right.
You'll see on this slide that some of these current deficiencies are going to be funded by grants and other funding resources. TIF may be used in some of this, which is not going to affect the homeowners. It's basically those three shaded items, where park capital improvement budget comes out of the park department's improvements, and that's a tax, property tax generated. Any type of community capital funds would be from that same method. There was also identified that there may be a bond issue, which would also be part of that.
All right. Any other questions, Ron?
Yeah, just one. How does this differ from a, like now we have property tax districts, if you will? How does this differ from a property tax district? Like we have fire and police, and you have a city tax and so forth and so on.
Yeah, this is basically a one-time collection. In other words, it's collected at the time that building permits are pulled by the builder or developer on that. This is something that is actually worked into that cost, like you would a sewer tap fee. It's not an ongoing type of thing. This is basically a one-time collection.
Okay, that helps some. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Lehman? All right, Rob, anything else you want to say?
That's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Any discussion on the council?
One, Mr. President, if I have my agendas correctly here, we want this to go straight through tonight because it's
well, it's not so much where we want it to. That's what happens with a notice of intent to consider. It's one vote for tonight.
Well, they said they want to request for suspension of rules through second reading.
You may have an outdated agenda.
Okay.
The first agenda that came out had request for suspension of rules. I asked Leah to take that off of there because it just gets one reading, because the park impact fee ordinance is done like a zoning ordinance.
I get it. Okay. So it's
Sorry
one.
about that confusion.
Okay. Thank you, Counselor.
All right. Any other questions, discussion, comments?
I have one. I was just thinking about the optics of raising a fee with everything that's been going on, but given that it takes place, 6 months from now when everything should be back to normal and we still have to plan for the city, and keep moving forward. So that's all.
Yep.
Fair enough.
It's one of those things that we do, and we're planning for 10 years from now. So,
Yep.
all right. Anything else?
When would this start? When this would actually, get off base?
I don't know
months.
yeah, it's 6 months.
6 months?
So it's mid-October.
Okay.
And until then, you'll be collecting all of your existing impact fee ordinance.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
What is that existing amount?
I think it was
Believe-
13.
1357.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions or discussion? See none, then roll call on ordinance 2012.
Bates, Campbell,
Aye.
Dine,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi,
Aye.
Middleton,
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
Ordinance 2012 passes on a vote of 9-0. First reading. Thank you, Mr. Lehman. Thank you, Mr. Taggart.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. First reading, ordinance 2019.
You mean ordinance 2010?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm having a hard. I didn't see it well. 2010. I'm sorry.
An ordinance to establish a community development block grant entitlement program fund sponsored by Gibson, Dine, and Bates.
Have a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Gitt, second by Mr. Bates. Any discussion? Seeing none, then roll call. Ordinance 2010. First reading.
Campbell,
Aye.
Dine, Gibson,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi,
Aye.
Middleton,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Bates.
Aye.
Ordinance 2010 passes first reading 9-0. Resolution 2005.
A resolution declaring certain area within the city of Greenwood an economic revitalization area and qualifying certain real property improvements for tax abatement and setting the time and place for a public hearing. 1173 Airport Parkway LLC Phase 1, sponsored by Hopper and Campbell.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Hopper. Second.
Second.
Second, was that Mr. Alexi?
Yes.
All right, second by Mr. Alexi. Any discussion, resolution 2005? I believe resolution 2006 is virtually identical, so. All right, no discussion. And roll call, resolution 2005, first reading.
Dine,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill, Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi,
Aye.
Middleton,
Nay.
Williams,
Aye.
Bates,
Nay.
Campbell.
Aye. Resolution 2005 passes first reading 7-2. Resolution 2006.
A resolution declaring certain area within the city of Greenwood an economic revitalization area and qualifying certain real property improvements for tax abatement and setting the time and place for a public hearing. County Line Partners, LLC, 1173 Airport Parkway, LLC, Phase 2, sponsored by Hopper and Campbell.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Hopper, second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Gibson. Any discussion, resolution 2006?
We do have an amendment that we need for this. It does have a typographical error in the name. It should not be County Line Partners. It should be County Line Properties. So I recommend a motion to amend Resolution 2006 in the caption and in the sixth whereas clause by changing the word partners to the word properties so that the name reads as County Line Properties LLC.
Motion.
So moved as presented.
Motion by Mr. Hopper, second by Who was that?
Mr. Dine, it looked
Mr.
like.
Dine. All right. I'm sorry. It's hard to figure out who it is when I can't see you. All right. We have a motion to amend Resolution 2006. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, roll call on the amendment to Resolution 2006.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi,
Aye.
Pendleton,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Bates,
Aye.
Campbell,
Aye.
Dine.
Aye.
Resolution 2006 is amended, a vote of 9-0. Any further discussion on Resolution 2006 as amended?
Mr. President,
Yes, go ahead.
this is Mark Myers, the mayor.
Yes, Mr.
I'd
Meyer.
just like to speak on behalf of this project. I've spoken with the people that have been in charge of this project, along with the attorneys in charge. We've had quite a bit of interest in this property in the past. This type of a building is a building that is one that will prove to be one that generally the salaries will come in much above what our average county medium average is. I strongly support this project, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any further discussion on Resolution 2006 as amended? Seeing none, roll call. Resolution 2006 as amended, first reading.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi,
Aye.
Pendleton,
Nay.
Williams,
Aye.
Bates,
Nay.
Campbell,
Aye.
Dine,
Aye.
Gibson.
Aye.
Resolution 2006 passes first, Resolution 2006 as amended passes first reading, a vote of 7-2. That brings us to new business, introduction of new ordinances and resolutions. Ordinance 2013.
An ordinance amending Greenwood Municipal Code 1993, Chapter 2, Article 8, Section 2-69, paid time off policy, and Section 272, family and medical leave to include federal emergency paid sick leave and emergency family and medical leave provisions, sponsored by Gibson.
All right. Anybody to speak about this?
I will explain. I'm sure you are all aware that the president signed into law what's been called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which adopted the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act and Emergency Paid Sick Leave for certain COVID-19 related absences from work. And so we are required to incorporate those into our policies so that if people are eligible and we pay them under that, the Board of Accounts would like to see that in our policies. So that's what this ordinance will do. We would like to ask for a request for suspension of rules through the second reading to go ahead and pass that tonight. Because the act was effective April 1st, we're going to make this active, retroactive to April 1 should you pass it through this evening.
Mr. President, I'd like to move for suspension of the rules.
Right, we have a motion by Ms. Gibson to suspend the rules through first reading. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Dine. Any discussion on suspension? Seeing none, roll calls on suspension, ordinance 2013.
Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi,
Aye.
Pendleton,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Bates,
Aye.
Campbell,
Aye.
Dine,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill.
Aye. Rules are suspended through first reading on ordinance 2013. Do I have a motion for first reading?
So move.
Motion by Mr. Bates, second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Gibson. Any discussion? Ordinance 2013? Seeing none, roll call. Ordinance 2013, first reading.
Lexi,
Aye.
Pendleton,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Bates,
Aye.
Campbell,
Aye.
Dine,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper.
Aye.
Ordinance 2013 passes first reading 9-0. Do I have a motion for suspension?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Gibson to suspend ordinance 2013 through second
Second.
reading. Second by Mr. Bates. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call on suspension.
Pendleton,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Bates,
Aye.
Campbell,
Aye.
Stein,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi.
Aye.
Rules are suspended through second reading. Do I have a motion on second reading?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Gibson, second by
Second.
Mr. Lexi. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call. Ordinance 2013, second reading.
Williams,
Aye.
Bates,
Aye.
Campbell,
Aye.
Stein,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi,
Aye.
Pendleton.
Aye.
Resolution 2013 passes second reading 9-0. Just a question, the ordinances that we pass through second reading that need signatures, will those be left in the council room by the council chambers?
Yes, I can get them there tomorrow.
Okay, so each of us will need to make our way by there when you can to sign these documents. So ordinance, moving on, ordinance 2014.
An ordinance amending the 2020 salary ordinance, Common Council Ordinance Number 1928, to repeal COVID-19 emergency stay-at-home pay provisions, sponsored by Campbell and Gibson. This is a companion ordinance to 2013. At the last meeting, you did amend the salary ordinance to allow the mayor in his discretion to pay folks if they had to stay at home, if they met certain conditions. We did that because no one else, the state or federal government, had acted to provide for paid leave. Now the federal government has done so. There is paid leave available under that federal act, and we no longer need our own local that might even, we don't need two sorts of provisions. So it is recommended that we repeal that. And there is a request for suspension of rules for second reading to get that repealed, so we don't have competing leave provisions.
All right. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Motion by Mr. Bates, second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Gibson. Motion to suspend the rules through first reading on ordinance 2014. Any discussion on that motion to suspend the rules? Seeing none, roll call on suspension.
Bates,
Aye.
Aye.
Stein,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi,
Aye.
Pendleton,
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
Rules are suspended through first reading on ordinance 2014 and voted 9-0. Do I have a motion on first reading?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Gibson, second by Mr. Bates. Any discussion on ordinance 2014 first reading? Seeing none, roll call. Ordinance 2014 first reading.
Campbell,
Aye.
Stein,
Aye.
Gibson, Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi,
Aye.
Pendleton, Williams,
Aye.
Bates.
Aye.
Ordinance 2014 passes first reading 9-0. Do I have a motion for suspension through second reading?
So move.
Motion by Mr. Bates, second by Ms. Gibson. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Any discussion on suspension? Seeing none, roll call on suspension ordinance 2014 through second reading.
Stein,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi,
Aye.
Pendleton,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Bates,
Aye.
Campbell.
Aye. Any discussion? Ordinance 2014. Seeing none, roll call. Ordinance 2014, second reading.
Do we have a
Gibson,
motion for second reading?
Oh, no. Do I have a motion for second reading?
So moved.
Move.
Motion by Ms. Gibson, second by Mr. Bates. Now, any discussion? Seeing none, roll call. Ordinance 2014, second reading.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
Lexi,
Aye.
Pendleton,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Bates,
Aye.
Campbell,
Aye.
Dine.
Ordinance 2014 passes second reading 9-0.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That brings us to miscellaneous business. Anything from the council? Miscellaneous business. By the way, I believe all of us are participants in the very first video conferenced council meeting in the history of Greenwood. So
History making.
congratulations. History making, yes.
Hey, Mike, two things real quick.
Yeah.
They talked about last week over this at the planning commission to leave anything need to be signed at the front desk there with watch commander. Would it be
Okay.
easier to do that? Because they have to buzz us into the building.
Yeah, that would probably be easier. So Lee, if you could just leave that with the front desk there in the city building, that'd just be easier for everybody.
Sure will.
That's one more person we'd have to stand next to and touch papers who've touched it. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, well, I have latex gloves.
Hand sanitizer.
Yeah, there's hand sanitizer at the desk. Bring your bottle of Lysol. You can spray the paper.
Also, Dale Marmaduke's mother passed away Friday. If anybody wanted to pass on condolences.
So who?
Dale Marmaduke's mother.
Oh, okay.
She was in her mid to late 80s, somewhere in there.
Sorry to hear that.
It's a rough time for funerals.
Yeah,
Yes, it is.
Mike, I'd just like to thank everyone, IT and the administration, for getting this set up so quickly that we could do the video conference.
I agree. They did it. They did a good job. All right. Anything else?
You, Mr. Campbell, there is Matthew Smith is wanting to speak if there was a second part for audience participation.
Yeah, that'll be fine. He's got 5 minutes the most.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hi, Matthew Smith. Oh, cool. Matthew Smith, 450 Southgate Drive, Greenwood. I believe it'd be a good idea for all of you to consider allowing homeowners to raise poultry on residentially zoned properties under strict conditions. Across County Line Road in Marion County, they have no ordinance like ours prohibiting somebody from raising poultry, and I believe there are many in our community who would find this to be very valuable. Due to the recent shortage of supplies at the stores, a lot of people are looking into all sorts of alternative means of obtaining what they need on a daily basis, like gardening. I just planted a garden myself the other day. I sent all of you an email last week that outlines what would be a fair revision to our ordinances. I understand that many think chickens are a nuisance, but what I'm suggesting would still be subject to all of the nuisance regulations in Section 6-270 and any rules that any HOA may apply to the people that live in their neighborhood. I believe it's possible to write an ordinance where we can keep our standard of living and property values while encouraging an interest in animal husbandry in the city. So, hey, thank you very much for taking the time to listen, and have a great night.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Smith. All right. Anything else from the council?
Night.
All right. Other miscellaneous business, Corporation Council.
I have none.
Anything from the mayor or the controller? Anything from the mayor?
Yes, sir, Mr. President. I want to thank you all for participating in this tonight, and especially for the last ordinance that was passed through. I think it's important to remember that this also included fire and EMS personnel and police personnel. Other municipalities have opted out of protecting them in this, and I think it's very important that we take care of every one of our city employees equally, and thank you for that very much.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And please pass on to our first responders, our police and fire, how much we appreciate the work they do and understand that they're putting their lives on the line and the health of themselves and their family right now. And we do appreciate it.
Roger that.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah, I'm sticking out of turn here, but thanks to the IT department for putting this together. They did a good job.
Yes, they did. All right. Seeing nothing else, then we are adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen, ladies, and you have a nice evening.
You too.
You too, Mike.
Thank you.
has left the meeting.